Hey friends, I'm Maxwell Freud, a queer Minneapolis-based board game designer and the host of Hatch This Way, a limited audio series where I chat with other queer folks in the tabletop industry to learn all about who they are and how they contribute to the hobby by being their authentic selves. And today, I am chatting with my friend Xoe Allred. Xoe, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for asking.
Absolutely. I'm so excited. So, just so people are aware, we had recorded a whole amazing episode for them, and we are going to use most of that episode. But since recording that episode, the big question that I ask on the show is, how do you identify? And for you, that had changed. And it's been, we did that, what, a month ago? Was it a month ago?
I think it was about a month ago. Yeah, a lot of stuff's happened.
Yeah, and that's totally valid. So I wanted to make sure you had the opportunity to come back on and make sure that what we put out there is as current as possible. And if needed, we'll update it in the future because why not? So big question. How do you identify? What are all the identifiers that make up Xoe?
Well, I identify as a aromantic, neurodivergent, trans mom or trans person.
Perfect. So let's get into some of those terms. So talk to me. Start with the first one. Aromantic. Yeah. I believe Arrow is short for that.
Yes, yeah. Arrow is short for aromantic. And it just means that I don't experience romantic attraction. Most people experience, or I assume most people experience romantic attraction, and like we call that alloromantic people. And so just like there's sexual orientations, there's like romantic orientations. So a lot of people might be hetero-romantic, and some people might be homo-romantic, and I'm just like none. I don't experience it at all. This was a big surprise to me because I was very much into the concept of romance.
I feel like that's kind of like one of those expectations. I feel like that everyone is like forced upon you is because we watched Disney movies growing up. And so that's the theme of every Disney movie. Until recently, they've shifted away from it a little bit, but it's like you need to fall in love, and then your life will begin. We'll circle back into like your journey. So let's finish with the other terms. So you said aromantic, and then was the next one?
Neurodivergent.
Oh yeah. Talk about that.
Yeah. So I used to just say I was ADHD, but in the past month, I'm pretty sure I might be autistic, but I don't know if it's worth the trouble of going through getting that diagnosis because I don't know how much it would change things for me. So I just know my brain works differently from most people. I know for sure I'm ADHD. I have a severe diagnosis of that, but I don't know what else is going on, but I know it's different.
Yeah, I actually just talked to another person on this podcast about how I had been asked to produce a whole series on autism to educate people about what autism is. And I had no idea. I like knew what autism was, but I didn't know. And I had to do all this research, like just a ton of digging for how would I go about presenting all this information to people. And there's a big portion of people who don't know if they're on the spectrum or not. There's people who they identify as autistic or on the spectrum, but not diagnosed. Like that's a thing. Like they, it's a whole other spectrum that I really want to dig into. And I think I might actually, if I do another series like this, I think that would be my next one and I'm also very interested in like getting the queer perspective on it. So like queer people on the spectrum talking about what is autism in their journeys, because that's a whole other journey that I think is very misunderstood or just not understood at all, that I think is worth exploring at some point.
Right. Yeah.
Teasing season 2. There we go. No plans, but okay. And then aromantic.
The last one was trans mom.
Trans mom, trans mom. So let's talk about trans. So you identify as trans. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, so um, I just know that I don't identify with the gender that was assigned to me at birth. I used to think very strongly that I was a binary trans woman, but realizing over the past month that I may not so be so completely beholden to the feminine, if that makes sense. And so I've just been, so I'm just like, I know I'm trans, I don't know what else. And people call me a mom. I'm just going to take the identifiers thrown at me, and mom makes sense to me because I have a child, and that's a big part of my identity. So I'm a trans mom.
What's the difference between like non-binary versus trans to you? Are they interchangeable? What would you say to
T-
that?
to me, there's a lot of overlap because people who are non-binary are often not completely aligned with the gender that was assigned to them at birth. It's entirely possible that somebody, I know if I were to have another kid, which is impossible, but if I had another kid, I would put non-binary on like their birth certificate because they wouldn't know their gender. But yeah, so like it's entirely possible to, and also there are some people who are non-binary but still kind of lean towards the gender that they were assigned at birth, and I would assume that's why they don't identify as trans. So yeah, I so like I'm reluctant to call myself non-binary because I don't know because I don't know how to accurately describe my gender, I guess is the problem. And I fear that by saying that I'm non-binary, that I'm implying some sort of misgendering if somebody would use masculine language or feminine language with me. But I no longer, I don't, I'm still exploring this territory, but that doesn't feel like it's the case for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we're kind of getting into the whole discussion. And was reminded of this somewhat recently, where my partner's brother was talking about. For him, he had never thought of the idea that gender and sex could be separate things.
Mm-hmm.
He was like, "Oh, I guess I never thought of it that way." And when you're engrossed in queer culture, we're kind of all that's part of the discourse of existing for us. So I think I have to remind myself that outside of my circle, that some people have never considered the idea that, oh, wait, my sex doesn't determine how I identify, you know?
Yeah.
And then just because we're kind of talking about it, what's the difference then between, trans, non-binary? There's also like gender fluid, which would
Mm-hmm.
be um kind of like it depends on the day, right? Is
Yeah,
that
yeah, yeah. Like I've known a few gender fluid people, and it's just some days they feel more masculine, some days they feel more feminine, sometimes somewhere in between. And so with some friends like that, it's for me, it's just easier to approach them and be like, so are you using he, him today? Is it she, her today? Are we feeling more this identity? Because one of my gender fluid friends has different names that they prefer to go by depending on their mood. So,
hmm.
so yeah, so so for some people, when they say ask for pronouns, that might be why they might be gender fluid, and it might depend on the day.
It's also like a setting expectations. It's like creating a safe place for someone to show up as themselves.
Yeah.
That's come up later is, how do you create that space for people to feel like they can be comfortable around you when a lot of us have to, like, I still am working on being comfortable being myself in everyday situations where I'm not subconsciously trying to navigate or find those like micro signals that tell me whether or not it's safe for me to approach you, and do I need to act less flamboyant, or I don't know, should I just be quieter? That's usually my safety response, is to like just be quiet so people
Yeah,
don't pick up on anything.
that's very
um
relatable.
that's my like survival mechanism, I think. So working against that and trying to be more comfortable in my skin is definitely a journey for me. But that's the great thing about when someone like includes their pronouns or introduces themselves. I think it's a really great signifier for like, oh, I can let my guard down a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. That's a big deal. Yeah, being asked like what your pronouns are and stuff like that is sort of like letting them know, like, hey, I understand that there are people that don't fall within cishet like normative structures, and so that definitely makes me feel more welcome and safe there.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about your journey. So I might backtrack a little bit to what we had talked to before, but even just starting, maybe not all the way back, but
Yeah,
maybe just talk to me through like what went on this last month. I mean, it must have been like right after we talked that something
yeah.
happened.
Shortly after we talked, so I have had like dating apps for a long time, but I'm not like actively checking them and stuff. And I would joke that I only had it for the validation of like when liking my profile. And it suddenly occurred to me that like I've had like some very like on paper perfect people like me, but I've never like expressed any interest in them. And the only time I ever got into apps in the first place was because therapists told me to try that I should do it for my own well-being or whatever. And so I was like, maybe I'm a romantic. And then so I started talking to like my friends. It's like, so like, what's the deal with this? Like, tell me what romantic feelings are, because maybe I've been getting this all wrong. And then I found out like all those songs about like love and all those romance stories and stuff is like people aren't exaggerating when they say that they have like butterfly feelings in their stomachs and that they lose sleep at night thinking about people. Like I never experienced that. For me, like every time I'm on an app, it's never like I look at somebody, I go like, oh, I'm interested in them. Like it's like I have to like read the profile and make a calculated decision. It's like, okay, based on the fact that they're queer and we share some interests, I suspect we'll be able to have a conversation. And that was how like I approached these dating apps. But apparently people like pick up some chemistry or something when they interact with people, and that's just absent with me.
So I don't think we ever went there before. Are you open to talking about maybe the relationship you had with like the other parent of your child?
Oh yeah, my ex-wife. Yeah. So I had met her before I came out. Back when I thought I was like a cishet like boy, like in like high school, I had met her, and we like were married for like 8 years. But it was funny because I went through with that entire marriage because it just seemed like the logical conclusion of our friendship. Like she was my best friend. She said she had romantic feelings for me. This must be how romance works. This I must have to reciprocate this. I mean, where this best friend feeling must be love, must be like so we gotta get married and have kids. Like this is what everybody does, right?
And I guess without seeing like an alternative or knowing there were other options or understandings of it, that totally makes sense. That like, and it's those expectations. Like I think that's what every parent wants for their child is to have that high school romance experience. Maybe I don't know some.
Yeah. Like something I hear a lot about in like lesbian circles is this concept of compulsory heterosexuality or something like that, or like women feel like they have to get into a hetero relationship because that's what's pushed on them and that's what's pushed by society, and so they feel compelled to like follow that path. And it's very much like that. Like what all the society is like going like, love is the most powerful thing, it's what makes us human, and finding the one is the thing that will completely complete you, and you're just over here like not having any romantic feelings. It's like, I guess I better get on that.
Oh God, no. I mean, when you say it that way, like, yeah. I mean, it. I can only imagine the kind of pressure of like, I can kind of imagine where it's like, oh, you need to. Society says you should be doing these things and feel a certain way about this thing because that's the expectation, and then you don't. It's terrifying and very it's terrifying. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We're very social beings, and being outcast is like evolutionarily what got you killed. So you don't want to be othered. So
Yeah.
when the whole pack is like going like get into a monogamous relationship, get married, have kids, and you're not, you're kind of like, okay, that's what we're all doing.
So, are you still on good terms with your ex-wife?
Yeah, I am.
Mm-hmm.
We weren't for a while, but it took some time. I came out to her. It's been a process, but yeah, we're on good terms now. We co-parent.
I think that's good to hear. Like, you know, I've really appreciated the people I've had on who have had positive experiences in coming out and support from friends and family and spouses. And I think we need more of that. So I'm very, very happy to share it when we get the chance.
Yeah.
I guess what else has been going on this past month? Because I feel like the first time you didn't even bring up that you were ADHD or neurodivergent. Or maybe you did.
I can't remember. I think it might have been a passing comment.
Yeah, I think you're like, oh, also.
Yeah. I'm finding it's a lot more in like, it's a bigger part of my identity than I realized. I came out shortly before the pandemic hit. So there was probably like maybe 4 months where I was like, where I realized I was trans and was like just starting to present the way that feels more like in line with who I was. And it was about the time, it was like around that 5-month mark when I was like, I'm ready to go out into the world and like meet people that like things locked down. And I was like, well, but I had felt like, because this process has given me a lot more confidence. I feel more comfortable in my skin. I feel like I feel happier with myself. So I sort of assume like this confidence is going to carry over to social situations, and I'm going to feel like a rock star there now. But I don't. I still feel like incredibly like awkward, and it's like I'm so much more confident. I feel beautiful. I feel like me. How come I can't vibe with people? And that was when I was like, oh, so this isn't just ADHD, or maybe the ADHD is impacting me more than I thought, or like.
It's hard for me to like expand on it because it's such a nuanced subject to like talk about how neurodiversity shows up in neurodivergent people.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of power in like understanding it and having language to put around it, and understanding that there are like resources and terms to help you understand it and figure it out and live your best life. I mean, that's really the goal, right?
Yeah. It's really helpful to find out that other people have like these same experiences as you. And like, maybe it doesn't fix your problems, but at least you know you're not broken, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So what people can't see is that you have shiny new pronouns. Do you want to talk to me about those and how you arrived at those?
Yeah. So I started using its pronouns. And at first it was sort of like a defiant, like almost like trauma response to something that happened to me. But I'm actually really liking them. So they're a little bit contentious as far as pronouns go, because some people feel like they're dehumanizing and like sets a bad precedent. And and to that I say, don't use it's to describe somebody that did not say you could use them for them, because it is dehumanizing in that context. If you see somebody that you don't understand and you're like, what is its deal? That's you're othering them on purpose, like to dehumanize them, and that's no good. But if somebody like myself says like those are the pronouns I prefer, then you're respecting them. You're respecting it. It's yeah.
Yeah, I think it's definitely not, one of the common ones, but it's what people identify as, and I think it's come up again, is that you just have to respect people. I mean, it's not. It might take some practice. I think it's not natural for me to say. Like, I definitely have to do like a little bit of quick mental like turning off my instincts of that's an object. It's like no, it's just I think it's also like a auditory thing where you just have to practice it. Like, you have to get used to using, like if you're not used to using even they, them to describe a person, a singular person, you just have to get used to hearing it. And then it's not weird. I think it's true for like, it might sound weird the first, I don't know, however many times you try it. But I think with any pronoun, because there's other uncommon ones too. I think like zer would be like a less common one, or
my ex-girlfriend was using zim for a while.
zim.
Yeah.
I've seen the fae. Yeah, and it might be a little awkward to hear initially, but I think again, it's just you just gotta do it. I mean, if you know that person.
Yeah. It's just the growing pain of adopting new language in a language that is incredibly gendered to an unnecessary extent. So we kind of have to awkwardly like adapt new non-gendered language or new gendered language into it.
I think it's also like a good opportunity when you do run into a person who uses pronouns that you don't maybe initially understand, to ask them about their lived experience and why they identify that way. Like, it's just a really great, unoffensive way to approach someone and say, oh, that's interesting. Like, how does that, what, how did you come to that? And like, what does that mean to you? I think that's a great introduction to get to know someone on a very personal level right out of the gate.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think with that, like, that's a really great, I think, update. Did we hit all the things that I think were different from last time?
I think so. Yeah.
Were there any other disclaimers I think that we need to add to anything we said before?
I think I may have said before that I was like pansexual and leaning mask, and I think I would still describe myself as that, except I'm like way less certain. I highly suspect that I'm also asexual, but I don't really know.
It's a journey, we can check in later. That's fine. I think what people should focus on is, I think we covered a lot of really good topics around trans identity and trans issues. So I think all that still stands regardless of if there are instances where you do refer to yourself as binary. Look past it. I really enjoyed chatting with you, so I hope people enjoy all the stuff we get to talk about and learn about. Talk to me a little bit about your journey of becoming your authentic self, like embracing all those identities.
A lot of this is like pretty recent. Only a few years ago was when a lot of people in the queer community refer to as your A cracking, when you realize that you're trans.
I've never heard that.
Yeah. It's something that I hear all the time, like that, like you're actually a chicken side or you're actually a cock inside. that you're an egg. That like there's this period of like 36 years where I was an egg and I just didn't realize I was a woman. And then my egg hatched, and that's when I realized, oh, I'm trans. And this explains so much. And as soon as it happened, I was like, oh, I'm just ready to do this full on switch. Because like a lot of people, they'll be like, okay, I'm going to gradually do it. I'm going to like like sort of experiment with presentation and experiment with names and stuff, and then gradually come out to people. But like within like a week, I was like out to my parents, and then like within a month, I was like out to my entire family, and then 2 months to my job. It was a very fast timeline for me.
That's wild. I feel like it seems like such a big thing, but yeah, it also makes sense to me that like when it's like right?
Yeah.
What was the dynamic like between you and your family when you were making that decision and going through that process?
So I think this was part of what made that process so easy for me. My family is like incredibly supportive. And by happen chance, like the universe giving me a hint, like my dad was having like a big argument with one of his friends because he was not being supportive of his children who were going through a similar experience. And so like hearing my dad like being very passionate about this other person's like children being supported through their journey, I was like, okay, I think my dad will be cool. That's not always the case, but like it emboldened me. And there was definitely like a little while where they're like, are you sure? Like a lot of people don't really understand, and like God bless them. Like, but like sometimes you come out to them and they're like, are you sure? Because being trans sucks right now. You know that? Like, it sucks. It's like, thanks. It's not really a choice. It's, it's like, yeah, it's going to suck, but yeah, that's me.
Yeah, we can get into it more, but there's a lot of discussions around like, oh, why would you want to? And it's like, do you really think people choose to go through all of the trauma that comes with trying to be yourself in this environment? Like,
yeah,
it's a common theme, and people, I don't know. Yeah, like you said, God bless them.
Yeah, God bless them. They're just worried about me, and they just don't understand. They're not like in that sphere, and it's sort of like the same stuff that like they think it's a choice. Like people with like gay children, they think it's a choice, and it's like it's just who they are. You can't like convince them to not be trans and not be gay.
But they sure try. Some of them do.
Oh yeah.
I've experienced some of that, not personally like on myself, but I've been to the Jesus camps where they prayed the gay out of kids and all that. I personally don't think it works, for the record. I wouldn't recommend it to anyone or any human being, but I have witnessed it. So talk to me a little bit about what do you think was holding you back for all those years? Like, why do you think it just happened that day when you finally were like, you know what, I think this is me?
It comes down to representation. This is why I'm so passionate about representation. I did not know that trans women were a thing until like maybe 2 years before I had my A cracked. Like, because before that, it's like all you ever see in the media is like people cross-dressing to trick people. There was like very few instances of like genuine trans representation in the media. And so maybe 2 years before my A cracked, I started seeing some trans YouTubers, and I was like, oh, they're very cool. I'm very interested in these people and their opinions, and I'm strangely fascinated and wanting to support them and their movements. And like, I'm just a really good ally. That's like a very common like meme. Like, I'm just a really good ally. Like, surprise, you're also trans.
That's the agenda, right?
Yeah, so I just didn't see it, and it wasn't until I was exposed to it and like I was just sort of marinating in it. The moment where my A cracked was not like watching like some trans stuff. I was like at a concert, like completely disjointed from queer like stuff. I was just at a concert, and that was when I got struck by this sudden urge to like, quotation mark, dance like a woman, and to be seen like a woman. And like I couldn't shake that feeling, that really strong feeling I had. And so I started like going out to online tests and being like, how do I know if I'm experiencing gender dysphoria? And then like 3 tests later, all telling me to see a gender therapist. I was like, okay.
I mean, it's cool that there were those like resources that you found.
Yeah.
I had a similar experience where you kind of see that person or that representation, and you have this like very unconscious connection with them instantly.
Yeah.
You're like, oh my God, that is, I think, how I feel on the inside. And I didn't know it until I saw it now.
Yeah, exactly.
So when we first met, you were using a different name. Do you want to talk about that process and why is finding a name
Oh, yeah.
important to you?
Well, when I first transitioned, I went by Kate because I figured that was the name I came up with myself when I was still closeted. I had came up with the username Cheshire Kate for this brief period where I was exploring network security. And I was like, okay, I just had this name for myself already. And then I picked up the nickname Katie. And honestly, it was sort of like I picked that name because I was just so in a rush to get rid of my old name, which like I refer to as like my dead name. And that was like the name that I had when people saw me as a man, basically. I feel fine talking about the name Katie because that's not really like a name that has like a lot of years of trauma associated with it. But I don't like to bring up my dead name, which is my name given at birth. That's like, it's complicated, but it's dysphoria inducing in the same way that getting misgendered is dysphoria inducing. It's gotten easier with time to deal with being misgendered. I could laugh it off a little bit more than I could when I first came out. But back then, like getting called my old name or being misgendered, it was like very painful. So that's why a lot of people use the term dead name because that name is dead to me. I don't want to hear it anymore. It's like picking up a new name, but like there's pain that's associated with it.
Yeah, I have trans friends I'll see them on Facebook or something and they see a family member who dead names them and I don't know them by that name. And I get cringy seeing it because I'm like, oh, like,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yes.
Do you still have people in your family that struggle with that?
It's very rare. Most of them are incredibly supportive. I have like one grandmother that's dealing with Alzheimer's. And so that's a real struggle. Like I love her so much because she had like Alzheimer's when I was transitioning, but she still made like such a serious effort to like pick up my new name and stuff. And like I'm like incredibly grateful because she is also like very Christian. So she was like the last person I came out to because we were just like, it's going to be so hard for her. And I don't know if it's worth it. She might not even be cool with it. But after a while, I was just like, I can't not explain. I can't not try. And she was just so incredibly supportive. But this is a name that was associated with us for who knows how many years. There are times when I accidentally write my own dead name when I'm like signing prescriptions. Like it happened at the pharmacy like several months back where they were like, your name? I was like, I blurred out my dead name. And I was like, oh my God. It just happens sometimes. Best thing you could do is just quickly apologize, don't make a big deal of it, and move on.
Did you ever try that thing where if you wanted to try out a new name, you go to like a Starbucks and you tell them the name and then so they'll yell it out when they get your coffee ready to see how it feels to have someone say that name back to you?
Not exactly. I have done that. So like sometime in the last year, there was like a brief period where I was like, I'm not sure if I'm completely vibing with Katie. And then in my personal Discord, I was like, I'm going to try the name Pash for a while. And that lasted about a day. And I was like, I'm going to try Zer pronouns. It's going to be cool. And by the end of the day, I was like, no. And then later, I saw the name Xoe and I was like, that name sounds amazing. I'm going to try that for a day. And by the end of the day, I was like, yes, I want everything to be Xoe now. And yeah, so just trying out stuff is like a really good way of just figuring out stuff. And I feel like we need to give people the space and like compassion to try out things because like why not. My kid says she wants to change her name like every day, but like it's really going to be whatever sticks with her. And she's like still 5, so I have the rule of like if it still resonates with you after like a long while, then we'll do the paperwork. But
no, that's awesome.
I know that I'm in a very uniquely privileged position where I've been very supported and that I'm able to support my kid because she is really cute. Right now she's going through a phase where she's like, today is a boy day. And I'm like, oh, I'm so happy for you. I didn't even know about boy days until like a year ago. So she's getting to experiment with like how she's presenting and then when she's old enough to understand like identities, and maybe she'll be like, oh, I guess I'm gender fluid. Right now she's very much attached to the doctor title and her, so I call her my daughter, but she's like experimenting with gender and stuff. And I think it's important to let people know that there are positive stories. It's not all garbage, because sometimes people are like, I'm afraid to come out to my parents because all I've heard is bad stories. And unfortunately, that is something we have to prepare for. If you're like dependent on your parents, it's a risk to come out to them if you don't know if they're going to be supportive. There's unfortunately a lot of families that are not supportive and that do not have that unconditional love.
Yeah, that's the fact. Is people like to think they have unconditional love. They say they do, but it turns out there might be conditions. No, I think the whole phrase, like, what about the children? I think right now we have a lot of save our children people out there, especially for like the Texas stuff going on. And I think what they really mean to say is, what about my child? Like, what about the white cishet kids? I think is what they really mean to say. You're not being as thoughtful as I think you are. And I think they also, in their minds, they see one trans kid and they suddenly think there's going to be a million of them. And that's not the case. You know, we're talking about a very small number of kids who just want to be treated like human beings. Like, they're not changing the landscape of schools and sports that everyone is getting so worked up about. I think people just have to realize we are very much a minority as queer people, and then trans people, a minority of a minority. It's not an epidemic or anything. It's just some people who want to live their lives, not have people tell them how to do it.
I think they're afraid, or I think they don't understand. It always comes back to representation for me, because I think if they just knew that we were just regular people just trying to live our lives and that we're not some weird cabal trying to convert the populace or for some weird like conspiratorial means, then like maybe they would be like, okay, if my kid turns out to be trans, I will support them and try to give them the least resistance in their life as opposed to the most resistance.
And no one, literally not one person, would consider becoming trans to get an advantage in a sports program or whatever program you want to block them from, or to get into a bathroom. Like, it's just not, no one is going to do that. It's not an issue.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
This, maybe it's a decent segue. So I do want to touch on the controversy around She Who Must Not Be Named, Harry Potter author, very vocal TERF. So do you want to talk about that a little bit, just because people might not understand, like, what's wrong with Harry Potter? Like, why don't people like it?
Yeah, this is such a tricky conversation, I feel like, to have with people, because I feel like like in the same way that you might describe like being vegan to somebody and all the benefits of like health and like the environment and animal cruelty stuff, and they're like, okay, but I don't want to hear it, I like cheese. I think there's the same sort of like aversion to learning about J.K. Rowling's transphobia, in the same sort of like, but I love Harry Potter, I don't want to know about. So I feel like it's really hard to like talk about this. But she is an extremely vocal and financial supporter of anti-trans movements and anti-trans hate groups. And it's also not 100% like clean to disjoint her from her work when she is still very much involved and very much a part of that brand. And also when you could see those kind of harmful things in her work. So yeah, I do kind of call out people when I see Harry Potter stuff and be like, she's a transphobe. It makes me uncomfortable that you are so vocally supportive of it. Like, just at the very least, be very quietly and shamefully like a fan, at the very least.
At least have shame.
Yeah.
I mean, even within the queer community, you're going to get split opinion. I agree. I think if you're going to be a fan, just be shameful and quiet. But just so people know, so she is very vocally and unashamedly a TERF, which is trans exclusionary radical feminist, I think is what it means, right?
Yeah.
So if I recall, her stance is that there are trans women and they're like their own group of people. She's like, yeah, I see trans women. They are totally valid as a people, but then there's also real women. And that's how she defines like women, is that you're either trans or you're a real woman. And it gets into this weird definition of, well, in order to be a woman, what does that mean? Like, well, you'll never menstruate or have children. It's like there are cis women who will never menstruate or have children. Are they not real women either? Like what are your definitions, and like why do trans women not deserve to be in the same breath or have the same rights and privileges as real women, quote unquote? So that's where it's problematic, is that you're literally sectioning off the marginalized group of people who just want to be recognized as human beings, just like everyone else. So did I get that right?
That's right to me. She's got this sort of idea that when women are defined by the sort of experiences that they've had as women who were assigned female at birth and raised female and are still female, and that is going to be very different from like a trans like woman's like experience having been assigned male at birth and then having like that different experience. But this sort of ignores how trans women don't really have a male experience growing up. Maybe they enjoy some of the privileges of being perceived as male, in that they don't have to worry about like their safety as much in certain situations. But there is still a very real frustrating experience that you have as a woman that everybody perceives as like a man and treats like that. That is sort of ignored here. And I think the more harmful part about it is that she redirects the conversation into this a lot. When you read her stuff, she reiterates a lot of the same talking points. She reiterates the fear of like trans women coming into like bathrooms to like attack women, which does not happen. Trans people are at way more risk of being like assaulted in restrooms than cis people are. That is a huge source of anxiety for trans people going into restrooms. And so she's reiterating these harmful like tropes. She's written a book with a literal man disguising as a woman to assault women. Like it's very overt. Yeah, it's just unfortunately there's a lot of really good resources online if you want to understand it more thoroughly. But yeah, she is very harmful to trans people, and her harm extends into very real consequences. A legislator was like quoting J.K. Rowling recently when they were passing some anti-trans legislation. She's having a very real world impact, like culturally and legally. And her influence is not something that could be easily ignored.
Recently, I think you're like, I don't know if infamous is the right word. I would give you all the credit for exposing this problem that was apparent in a software that a lot of us game designers were using, especially during the pandemic, called Tabletop Simulator. So we played a ton of games together on Tabletop Simulator. Can you just briefly talk about your experience and like why a lot of groups and game designers are moving away to other solutions?
Yeah, I had a very negative experience with Tabletop Simulator, but I think it would be something that would be easy to dismiss if it was just like a weird, like they didn't have their heads in the right place. But the reason it escalated so much was because of the response that I was getting from the company and from their moderation team about how queer identities were not family friendly, were not acceptable, were political, very damaging, harmful, like stereotypes of queer identities. So to hear that coming from staff and moderators and employees was like when I was like, yeah, I need to distance myself from this thing that I've invested thousands of hours and like based like my like game design career on. It's time to steer ship because that is not a platform I want to be associated with or involved with. And when I shared my experiences, I think others found the same thing. And it was a common experience that people had trouble communicating with them. And this was just sort of like last straw on the camel's back for a lot of people.
I think just to give listeners context, so this was a software. It's basically like it's an MS Paint for board game design. Let's put it that way. That's about right.
Yeah.
And I think your specific experience came from just exploring. They have a global chat function, and people say terrible things in the global chat, and you would pop in and just say something like, "Well, actually, I'm gay." And then you would get banned for just bringing up the fact that people were being terrible, and you were just trying to identify so that people wouldn't be so terrible publicly, and you kept getting banned. And then you reached out to figure out why the word gay got you banned, but not the horrible things people were saying. And it just unearthed this whole, what you just described of, well, it goes against our family-friendly policies or whatever. And then as it escalated, there was a number of people coming forward and saying, no, we also have issues with how you're handling this. And then at the same time, all these terrible alt-right, super homophobic people who also use the platform just came out of the woodwork to defend them and just said terrible things. So the community was split between just inclusive people looking to have a safe gaming experience for the prototypes, and the hate groups that apparently filled the rest of the platform. So it just exposed all that. So now there's other options too. It's like, so we're looking for other options to build our prototypes, to meet and know that it's going to be a safe platform. We're not supporting a program that is actively gathering place for hate groups. There's responsibility in making sure that you're creating safe places for people. And even if they change their moderation policies in the global chat, it's like, what are you doing to prevent hate groups from just building up in your community? Are you fine with that? And they were very much fine with it. So I don't know if they've made any active changes. I haven't opened it since then.
Yeah, so like my interactions with them happened over the course of like a week. So I had like a week head start of like, I'm going to start looking at our platforms in case the company has like a problematic stand on it. And so I was like checking out Tabletopia and Screen Top GG and Tabletop Playground and stuff. And there are definitely some really solid options. I would say far better, actually. They just don't have the user base yet.
Which might be a positive, it turns out.
Yeah. I think this is like one of those things that will be like a good direction for the whole design community to like sort of pick up on a platform that's actually supportive of their endeavors and actually has a vested interest in being inclusive. So yeah, I do think it'll be a positive direction.
I agree. So now that we've kind of started the conversation, let's go into the more fun stuff. So I'm interested to talk about board games because that's how we met. That's why we're here. Really quick, talk to me about what got you sucked into this hobby that is for some all-encompassing for pretty much everyone who gets involved at any capacity.
I've been interested in designing games since I was a small child. And for the longest time, I thought it would just going to manifest in the form of video games. But that turned out to look unrealistic given capitalism. So instead, I worked until like maybe a few years back when I had learned about Root. And I was like, oh, so you can tell very interesting, compelling stories and have very interesting thematic gameplay elements in your board games. And then like maybe some more time passed and I was like, wait, all the ideas that I had for video games, I could actually make those as board games. And and then so that just started down a path of like, oh, I could actually make these. These are things that I can actually design and make. So I've just been sort of obsessed with it since I realized that tabletop games are a viable means of that sort of creative process.
What are some of your favorites, or what do you look for in a game if you're like going to bring it to the table a bunch of times or have like a really great experience? What do you think are the common themes?
I really like games with very high social elements to it. So a lot of times this looks like party games, but the games that I really love are a little bit heavier, like kind of like Root and Oath, that have like these very interesting sort of win-making elements where you might be forced into a position where you have to decide whether one player or another will win. I'm a huge fan of games like High Society and Modern Art, and I like Codenames and other games like that. So it's a very weird spread of like these casual party games and these heavy like games like PAX Premier.
Nice. What are some of the games you recommend to people who are getting into the hobby or interested or looking for some fun titles to play with friends or family?
That's a very tricky question, I feel like, because I feel like it will depend very much on your individual taste. One that I like is Shipwreck Arcana. I like recommending that one because I feel like it's a very low intense cooperative kind of experience, and it's sort of like Sudoku but with other people's like numbers. It's a fun little game. Codenames is a great one to get into. If you're looking for something like a little bit heavier, maybe Fort. Cosmic Encounters, another one that's on the heavier side, but I think it's like good, like not too complicated. Yeah, it really depends on your group and what you're kind of interested in. If you're interested in bidding and trading, then Bonanza is a really good game. If you're, it'll depend.
Okay. So I know how I would describe some of your games. How would you describe some of your games, or what do you try to achieve in the games that you design?
So, I had been describing my games as non-violent games about real-world conflict. Although lately I've been thinking, I think my games are just high social violent games. There's usually a lot of deduction involved. They're usually semi-cooperative. There usually is a lot of conflict involved, but still in the space of like, we could work together. We could. Emphasis on could.
I think I would say you are really great at pulling out themes and like thinking thematically and talking thematically and cohesively. I think cohesion's a big thing in all the games I've played of yours, where like everything makes sense in the gameplay and the theme. I never feel like I try one of your games, I'm like, I don't understand why this is in there. Like you always have a way of thematically tying in a mechanic into the gameplay. So I'm like, oh, I get it. Like that makes sense. And I remember when you did your pitch, like it was like the best thing because it was so cohesive. You had this amazing script written where everything thematically made sense and you got to talk about all the mechanics in a very interesting and thematic way. So that's what I appreciate about playing with you. And then you give like really great feedback based on that too. That's my pitch for everyone to try your games.
Oh, thank you.
Anything else you want to add or talk about games-wise? What should people know?
I think people should know that there are a lot of great games to try, and that if you've been thinking that I wish I could make this game, then I think you should just go for it. I think too many people think that it's just not a thing that they could do, but it's actually incredibly accessible with today's tools to just create a card game or create an idea and to just try it with folks. So yeah, try gaming, and if you think you want to make a game, do it. Just do things.
And so if you can do physical prototypes, like we mentioned, there are some digital platforms which are really great because cutting out cards and making custom components can take a while. But if you have like a digital platform where a lot of it's already made or is easy to change and update, it's a really like fun way to try out a bunch of different ideas and just see how they feel. I know we both have played in Break My Game. That's a Discord group. And then, I mean, there's a bunch. Like I have a Discord server for every day of the week. So if I wanted to play test any day of the week, I know I can go on and someone's playing. Are there any other groups you would recommend people checking out to try prototyping or get involved or learn more?
Break My Game is a huge one. Pro the Spiel Online is another great one if you're looking for online sort of groups. Weird Giraffe Games is also another server. I don't do a lot of play testing there lately, but it's just another cool group to hang out in. I have a server too if you want to join that. But for my Knife Bunny games. But otherwise, yeah, those are like the ones that I frequent the most.
Excellent. So how can people follow, support you, try your games? How do you get involved with Xoe?
So I have a website, knifebunny.com, like knife and bunny. And from there, you can find all of my social media. You can find my Twitter. You can find my Discord. You can find my games. It's pretty much all on there.
Perfect. It fits with your like social violence, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. Those are all the questions. That was so much. I think we covered a lot of stuff. Hopefully people enjoy it. As a disclaimer, I just want to remind everyone that we are just a couple of queer folks. We do not speak for the entire LGBTQIA+ community, nor are we trying to. The best way to be an ally is just to keep learning, listening, and remember that we're all just trying to figure it out together. That's all I have. if you're listening, know that you're loved and perfect just the way you are. And until next time.
Yeah, bye.